Welcome everyone to the final session of the summit, the countdown to Cookieless. Are you guys prepared? Because we're trying to be. My name's Lindsay Stewart, Vice President of Sales at InMarket, and today I'm joined by Gogi, founder of Gupta Medina, and Alex Binder, Vice President and Director of Group Connect. Together, we're gonna discuss how our advertisers are embracing the change and preparing for the loss of ad targeting tools such as third-party cookies, alternative identifiers like Apple's IDFAs, and more. So please help me welcome Gogi and Alex to everyone. Please join me. Welcome, Gogi. Welcome, Alex. Nice to see you guys.
Thanks for having us.
No, thank you.
So let's jump right in. We got a lot of great questions from the board, from panelists, from people here in the Boston Chamber. So let me start with a kind of simple one, but as we migrate away from cookies, how do we find solutions that are not just effective in the short term, but set brands up for success long-term across all of the platforms? Who wants to start?
I mean, I'm happy to take that one. When we think about the world is sort of in this period of change, and I don't know if I would advise our clients to try to swim against the tide of regulatory changes, legislative changes, technology changes, right? So we're gonna have to move to something that's less individual and either more cohort or, as that pendulum swings back, I think it's gonna be, we're gonna there will be a deep sense of creativity coming back in, right? So, I'd like to say that if you've been in marketing for the last 20 years, you're probably a digital marketer. And if you're a digital marketer, you love numbers and you love tracking, you love analytics. I think these changes are gonna cause us to flex a little bit some of those other muscles, right? What does creativity look like? What does messaging look like? How do we measure top down? Cookies were very useful. Right? They let us get very precise. They let us track people across devices. They took all the risk out of it. I think what I say to our clients is you have to measure both top down, how is the business doing, and then bottom up, how are the channels contributing, and then finding a way to balance that where the channel contribution is much, much more fuzzy.
Yeah, Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think over the past couple of years, more than that, we've kind of been relentlessly pursuing more addressability, being able to be in more addressable channels and target individuals based on first and third party cookies. And I think long-term, where we're going is really shifting from a model where users can opt out to one where they are going to be explicitly opting in. And so it's just going to result in an ultimately decreased, smaller pool of addressable opportunity and kind of ad space, for lack of a better term. So I think we really do need to pivot our mindset away from the relentless kind of pursuit of addressable opportunities and accept that that will have to be a smaller piece of how we think about our investment, our measurement, and our media mix. And then I think just talking about short-term versus long-term, in the short term, I do think looking at long-term solutions, the time is still now to start kind of putting together a learning agenda and a roadmap for how you're going to think about replacing the cookie, because it is going to be a long and winding road for a lot of these alternatives that are currently on the table.
Yeah, definitely. And the cookie-free world is definitely leading us into better data privacy. So on that topic, what will the landscape of data privacy look like in a cookie-free world?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Apple's doing is going to set the tone, right? Their entire model is built around restricting, aggregating, and delaying data, and I think you'll see that in some element of those three in basically every iteration that comes forward. Google had their federated learning of cohorts, Flock, and as soon as that went out, it was interesting. Amazon put code on all of their sites that started blocking it, right? So we're in this world where we had cookies were universal. Nobody loved them, but they were kind of so bedrock in the fabric of the internet that everyone accepted them. And now every big tech player is saying like, let's do it our way. Let's do it our way. Let's do it our way. And when Google says something, Amazon says no. When Amazon says something, Apple says no. Right? We're going to have this interesting, I don't know if we're going to find that next thing that was as simple and universally accepted as cookies.
Yeah.
Go, Alex.
I was just going to say, along the same lines, I think there's going to be a lot of focus on first-party data, hashed emails, other identifiers to replace the cookie, and the walled gardens, the Googles and Facebooks are most immediately positioned to kind of best benefit from that. But I think similarly, as mentioned before, like ultimately the platforms, publishers that will be best positioned are going to be the ones that earn the consumer's trust, because when they have these opportunities to be opting in or out, the opt-in rates are going to be higher amongst the platforms that they trust. So even if Facebook and Google have this information on consumers and on users, those individuals aren't going to be opting in to allow them to use their personally identifiable information for advertising purposes if they don't ultimately trust the platforms.
Yeah, and that's kind of where our next question goes of, how will publishers and data tech companies account for that, for privacy? And will brands have to layer on an ad verification partner more than now because of the new privacy and to be able to account for all these changes and be more transparent?
That's an interesting question, right? Because I think that the headline is that cookies going away increases ad fraud. The truth of the matter is, if you were using cookies for ad fraud, it was a terrible solution anyway, right? So I don't know if that the headline that you might see is that really, like if you get down to the practitioner level, if that really holds, right? So cookies going away does not increase ad fraud. Ad fraud is, it's scary, it's rampant. There's a lot of incentives for people, bad actors, to participate in it. And that's why, I keep saying top down, right? Does my cash register ring? Like, if your cash register is ringing, that's good. How are the channels contributing to that? That's important. We're not going to lose, what does the cash register stay? We are going to lose, what does each of these platforms say they're contributing? And I think the executives, especially like business leaders like we have here, it used to be you could almost explain the whole story with data, and now it gets further apart. And that's where it takes a little bit of executive confidence in the team that you have. Then you have to start making a bigger and bigger leap of faith on what the platforms are saying and what your cash register is saying.
Then what does ad fraud look like with no cookies?
I think, building on what Gogi said, I think on that front, that the ad verification partners should already have been and will continue to be an important partner and an important space in which we're pushing all of our partners towards to ensure that there's some accountability and some opportunity for third-party verification. Especially with these walled gardens like Google's and Facebook's, they've had so much power already with kind of grading their own homework, reporting out on how they've contributed to ultimate conversions. And I think even as that goes forward, I think it's important to remember the cookie has already been deprecated from Safari and Mozilla. So this isn't new or blindsiding those ad verification partners, the double verifies and modes. So they've already been working towards these cookieless solutions. And I think they're going to continue to be critical partners as we move into some of these new cookieless solutions to still be combating fraud. I know with Google, what they're rolling out in terms of like the trust tokens, there's definitely the technology that exists and API solutions that can ensure we can differentiate human versus bot traffic, but doesn't necessarily need to also be exposing individual data or any data that could be mapped back to an individual.
Yeah.
I think that's actually a really interesting, if you sort of follow that thread a little bit, I love the media mix planning acronym, it's PESO, paid, earned, social, owned. So paid, earned, social, owned. And I think you get a lot of, quote unquote, a lot of ad fraud on the paid side. I think there's less on your own channels, email, and then there's almost zero on something like SMS. So I think what you'll see is sophisticated marketers using paid to build their first party, so they have, sort of an evergreen way to talk to their audiences, right? And then you go from, I know this person has a phone number, I know that they're verifying the welcome text. So when I paid $6 for that phone number through paid media, I know I have an asset that's real on the other side. So there'll be a little bit of, it used to be easy where you could go from ad impression to ad click to hopefully a conversion, and it was all sort of measured on a pixel. Now you're starting to cross marketing channels, and you're using one channel to build the other, and moving your audience from third party unverified to first party and owned. Those are some interesting challenges.
What measurement strategies can ensure KPIs are built with the evolving regulation in mind?
Measure it yourself. Like, I hate to be so blunt about it, but if you buy your advertising on Facebook and you use Facebook tools to verify that your advertising is working, you leave yourself open. When you start stitching together, sales data and web analytics data and advertising data, it takes a lot more work, but it's a lot more trustworthy.
Yeah, and I think what is tough is that cookies really did serve as kind of like the core foundation for a lot of even the most basic digital measurements. So things like basic A/B testing or brand lift studies were often structured and reliant on cookies. So I think we're seeing cookieless solutions being rolled out across primarily, again, the Google's, Facebook's, Amazon's with their own cookieless cloud-based data solutions, clean room solutions, where you can have essentially the same clean room structure and A/B test that cookies otherwise afforded. So I think starting to at least explore those alternative options are going to be important as just like a tactical way to continue some of that test and learn A/B testing that was typically done through some sort of cookie involvement.
So I think that's where, I think that's a really interesting point, right? Because we're getting to, if you take these clean room environments, ways to fingerprint a browser, right? What I always worry about is what happens when the Boston Globe calls and says, are you doing this? It's going to be a user that opted out of being tracked, and you got really smart and you figured out how to track them. And you're fundamentally not respecting the privacy concerns of your users, right? Yes, you can do it, but should you do it? And I think that's where cookies were it was so vanilla, right? It was so vanilla that it was yes, we should do it. It uses a cookie. They know how to delete cookies. But if you're having your browser and all your plugins fingerprinted, so you can measure lift, I think you have to know what you're doing there, right? And that is circumventing the user's preference.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's a lot easier to talk about on a panel like this. And then once you actually dive in, they're such complicated kind of developer tech intensive operations. And I think to your point, there is a lot of alternative solutions that the gold standard of it being 100% deterministic is going to be hard to parse out. So you really have to start doing your homework now to determine which are going to be the best case scenario solutions to pursue if that's really going to be a critical part of your ad strategy. But otherwise, I completely agree with you. It seems like an area that is still definitely an opportunity for those types of things where a user opts out, but they're still included in these pools. And so it's a tricky space.
Yeah. What we've seen come back recently is I think every ad person hates them, but they're called go dark experiments, where you like literally turn off your ads for 72 hours. And then you can start understanding the immediate and sort of slightly delayed impact of what your advertising was doing. We've had a couple advertisers. A large event just did a go dark with us, and we're starting to see a lot more like regional holdouts. We have one client who is big enough to do this, but they will actually turn off advertising for a full year at a time. Out of 50 DMAs out of the 250 in the US, so 20% of the country is blocked a year at a time, so they can measure regional lift across a huge basket of DMAs. But that kind of stuff is scary, right? We used to do it as like a 1% test on this little thing, and then like turn it on and off, and and now we're like saying turn off 20% of the country. Let's see what happens, right? But I think that's what we have for the next 18 months, 24 months.
And I like that too. I support that kind of just like back to basics approach to measurement methodologies, because I think on the flip side, what has already been happening is like it kind of endlessly complicates some quick test and learns when you are trying to introduce tests that are too complex, because the data and the pipes kind of enable that, but there's still so many steps involved in just setting up the methodology correctly. So I do think taking a step back and taking a more simplified approach can be a really positive alternative.
Yeah. Lindsay, do I have time for a 30-second story about the biggest lawsuit in ad fraud?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Okay. So Uber, right? Everybody in America has Uber. There's like two audiences that don't have Uber. And that is people with new phones that actually will use Uber. People with new phones and people that just turned old enough that their parents will let them use Uber, right? So Uber was doing this huge app install campaign, 7 figures a day in media spend, right? As big as they get, driving app installs. It was verified 5 different ways: server, third-party verification, app store, internal systems, and one more, but verified 5 different ways. But what the AI machine learning bidding algorithm was doing was 2 things. And it's actually really, it's a really funny story of like what machine learning does if you let it just go. It said, I'm gonna serve an ad to every 13-year-old every single day until they download Uber, right? Because at some point they're gonna be 14, 15, 16. At some point they're gonna get it. But for like a 2-year window, they just owned that cookie window, right? And then every new phone, so they would put very little to be on every one of those kids' devices and have their window for affiliate fees open. And the other thing was, if they ever saw a new phone on the network, they would bid, some market clearing rate, $1,000 CPM, $2,000 CPM. Because you get a new phone, you download Uber, Instagram, right? Spotify, you go through your 5 or 6 apps that you need. So those 2 channels always worked, and they were verified 5 different ways. The new SVP came in and said, just shut it down. And it was 200,000 or their 250,000 daily downloads. So paid was like the lion's share. New SVP comes, says, shut it down. Let's see what happens. You know what happened? The 200,000 that were showing up as paid just went over to organic, right? Nothing was incremental, nothing was causal, but that go dark experiment was like, you could look at reams of data and not get there. We have the same number of downloads today, right? Go darks are powerful. And I think we go back there a little bit.
Oh, it's interesting. And we've talked a lot about, I think Go Dark's a great example, and measurement, but let's focus a little bit on the targeting aspect that people relied on cookies for. So, how can advertisers still ensure that they're targeting their intended audience with the loss of the cookie? And do you see advertisers potentially over-targeting consumers to make up for the loss of that consumer data?
That's a question written by Facebook, it seems. Facebook would love it.
I can't say.
It is, these big platforms would say target everyone, we'll figure it out for you. I do think there are some ad optimizations that are worse because cookies have gone away. When you can't connect the user to the website, browsing behavior becomes more difficult. But that's where I think like the creativity and the ad messaging and this so many parts of advertising that have gotten lost in a spreadsheet start coming back. And I hope the marketers on this call are starting to invest in how do I go tell the story? How do I position the brand? How do I compete against my competitors? How do I differentiate my product, right? Like all those things where it isn't just moving somebody down a spreadsheet to a sale, but really making them want your product.
And I am optimistic about the possibility or the idea of cohorts. Again, I think those types of interest-based targets have always sort of existed in some form or another and across the different platforms, especially when you kind of break it down to the level of just putting together groups of people who share interests. It's essentially like interest targeting that you can do on other platforms. And I think there is a way to do it and roll it out in a way that can truly blind or make sure it's preventing the ability to identify individuals. And it's just a matter of, with the Googles or whoever is going to be rolling out the solutions, allowing other third parties to audit and ensure that they're actually doing it in a compliant way or in a way that actually does what they say it does. And I do think also the talk about the return to contextual targeting, I think there's a lot of interesting new opportunities there as well. And just like I was saying before, the kind of relentless pursuit of addressability and looking to push budget to where we could identify sets of individuals, kind of set that aside. But I think there are a lot of interesting ways to think about how we can leverage context, and the technologies in which we can parse out different contexts have shifted so much, and there's so much opportunity there at the same time as well.
Yeah. So since we've known for some time that there is this end of the cookie that everyone's been talking about, do you feel most advertisers are prepared, or are many still playing catch up? And also, if you can think of someone that's prepared, and what are they doing? I think that'd be interesting to talk about.
I will. I think, well, it doesn't matter if you're prepared. This thing hit you like a ton of bricks 6-7 weeks ago, right? So we're in this brave new world. There's a couple things that we thought we would do, and then there's a couple things we actually ended up doing. We were convinced we were going to have to like take all of our historical data and then model it on. So like, what does 1 day click, 1 day view, what percentage did that look like previous to this change? And can we use multipliers and, 1,000 little, pluses and minus to get to a real number? We've gone back to some sort of brute force methods. We talk about, used to talk about advertising as like a CPA. Now we talk about it as the percentage of revenue. So in the same document, understanding what daily revenue looks like and what advertising looks like, and then making sure that your splits stay consistent. It's not as fine grained as we used to have, but it's actually a really effective way to make sure that, you continue to invest in the way that you used to.
And I think on that front, again, maybe optimistic, I think a lot of advertisers are maybe more prepared than they think they are, because there's not going to be a clear black and white solution that's just going to fall into our laps. Like, it's going to be a gray area for a while. But I think the best thing that advertisers can continue to do to prepare, and what we've been working with our clients on, is just really taking some steps to make sure that you are best prepared. And I think that involves just kind of shoring up all your data, taking stock of all your campaign performance, all of your KPIs to date, and establishing those benchmarks that you can then compare against when the cookie does deprecate, for instance, or when IDFAs became less available with the rollout of iOS 14.5. And I think just really starting to put together some of those kind of test and learn roadmaps so that you can be testing out, LiveRamp's new solution or the new Unified 2.0 solution, so that you can start to establish what new kind of match rates look like for your client, and based on your own CRM data, and start to at least get more data to help direct where you kind of want to double down or invest in terms of what some of these alternative solutions do look like.
So you touched on it, the alternative solutions. Do you foresee an influx of new technologies arising to provide alternatives to things like Google's privacy sandbox? I know there's been talk of, initiatives like Turtle Dove. Do you see new alternatives popping up and new technologies that are going to come and replace this?
I think what you'll see on the simple side, and Turtle Dove cracks me up because there's a video out there that's a 12-minute explainer of what Turtle Dove does. And even if it says like Turtle Dove explained in 12 minutes and I've watched it 10 times and I still I'm just not smart enough to understand how Turtle Dove works, right? It's like dual paths of cookies and verifications, and I'm sure it works, but it is complicated. Just remember, cookies are browser-based. The server is still really powerful, right? So there is the big platforms, the ones that are going to drive 60, 70% of our volume, are moving to server-to-server communication, which takes some of the risk of individual browser cookies out of this, right? So when you say Facebook has their conversions API, and if you're like, everyone should be implementing the conversions API because it lets you get, browsers are really rickety all of a sudden, but the server interactions are pretty good, right? So if your thing, I don't have to do that. Like my advice to you is server-to-server integrations are powerful. Use them. And then try to figure out Turtle Dove and then tell me how it works.
Just one or two more questions really on looking towards the future. What new frontiers are advertisers exploring and what's exciting you guys most coming up?
Alex, you want to take that one? Want to go first?
Yeah, I think I am, as we talked about, and kind of how the walled gardens have been gaining the upper hand. I think it's actually well beyond that. They're kind of dictating the changes in the industry landscape. Like we're here today because of Google's announcement, and we've spent the whole first half of the year panicking around Apple's announcement. And I really think that continues to be a problem for the industry at large, and it's clearly only getting worse. And I think the flip side of that is the legislation and the regulation that we're seeing come down and that we know is going to come. I think that will be interesting just to kind of not only more clearly put regulation and restrictions in place to protect consumer privacy, but also just to kind of level the playing field a little bit more and give other kind of companies, alternatives, at least an opportunity to really compete with the big tech partners who have really been dictating every aspect of what we've been talking about today.
Yeah, and just to build on that, like there's a great word, disintermediation, right? Like you getting separated from your customer, right? We used to be able to email somebody, and if they had a Gmail account, it got there, maybe they opened it. No, they didn't. Now everything you email someone with a Gmail account ends up in a separate folder that nobody looks at, right? Facebook organic reach used to be 70%, now it's 2%, right? All these tech companies, they create these connections and they push you apart from the customer. So I think it's every marketer's job, every executive's job to stay close to the customer, right? Email address is good, phone number is better, right? How do you work to build your marketing stack that keeps you close to your customer? That's the challenge for the next 2-3 years.
Well, thanks, guys. This has been really informative and helpful, and I think it's always just something nice to all come together and chat about. And I think I have some questions from the audience, if you guys have a few more minutes.
Yeah, of course.
All right. Sorry, I'm going to read off here for a minute. In terms of future success, is data science and leveraging emerging technologies, i.e. machine learning, AI, the most important? And what are you investing money in now to be prepared for the future?
I'm hiring data scientists. I run a media agency, and most of the jobs that we're looking for are data scientists. But it's less AI, machine learning, and it's more just sort of like pure modeling, pure predictive bidding, those types of things. So, we're looking for people that are good with math and can sort of cobble together lots of different data sources. GDS, BigQuery, Redshift, right? Whatever the underlying database is, but we need to get to one view of the world that is not on tech platforms ads manager, right? Like it has to be in our world.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest clients we work on being a bank, a lot of what has scared us and continues to is some of that lack of transparency with AI and machine learning. So I think in some ways it almost runs counterintuitive to what we're talking about, where you kind of lose the thread of how your customer first-party data is actually being applied and leveraged once you upload it to these platforms. So I think it's really digging into a lot of these systems, which does take a lot of data scientists, but also just a deep knowledge of the platforms, then just knowing when to draw the line on what sort of offerings are too risky, are not clearly compliant enough with how you expect your media partners to be using your own first-party customer data.
Another question we have is, how do you prove out awareness driving tactics for clients?
When we think about everything, we think about, as trade as it is, that sales funnel. And I think it's important when you think about like what awareness does, right? More people should be searching, more people should be visiting your website. You should have increased chatter. Like you might not have more sales, right? Like you need DR to make that happen. But awareness that doesn't move top line numbers it's just bad advertising, right? Like, so what we do is when we break up our upper funnel, mid funnel, bottom of the funnel, we have different KPIs, but we report on them on in our live reporting, it's every 15 minutes, but for client reporting, it's every day. And what you're looking for is if you did something big, you bought a big billboard at South Station or North Station, you'd want to see some of those top line numbers move, right? But you have to measure, for a project, you're probably having 5 or 6 different KPIs per funnel stage, and your marketing should move those.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, awareness kind of continues to be one of the hardest metrics to actually put measurement against. And I think there are ways to, in the shift to kind of first-party data, there are ways to be applying that data either through exclusions or through kind of using that as a seed audience for lookalike opportunities that will still exist, to know that you're kind of prospecting smartly, or when you're going after those broader audiences, reaching them with the smartest kind of targeting that you can apply. And then I think what we've hit on a little bit, but not much, is just refocusing on the creative experience as well, and making sure that when you're trying to drive that awareness, you're really hitting them with immersive, really memorable, creative, for lack of a better word, to really ensure that you're driving that awareness.
You can always feel success, right? Like if something's great, just like the phone rings, people talk, you can feel it. Like you don't have to be, it doesn't show up in a database or Google Analytics view, like, right? So I think that's where, like, every once in a while, I think progressive, if it's like how not to be like your parents, like everybody knows that, everyone has a laugh, like this reaction, right? Like that's a great campaign because it clearly broke through the clutter, right?
I know. It is like the art to the science. Like when something really hits and there's that word of mouth, you just kind of feel it,
right? It's harder when you think it should work and nothing moves. Then you go looking for 1,000 KPIs and you can't find any. So, that I think with awareness, you kind of like, if you have taste, you'll feel it.
I agree. And it's interesting. You guys are speaking a lot about just getting back to that natural conversation, custom conversation. What that means to different brands is always going to be a unique conversation. But are there new frontiers besides the AI that you're hearing about? That where people are exploring, or what you're most excited about coming up? Anything your clients are asking you, or you're trying to make your clients question that they should be looking at in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that we call it the big on here. And that is, it's, what is radio anymore? Radio advertising is largely podcast, right? so many of Gen Z is not watching ABC at 8 o'clock, they're watching Hulu, right? So TV for that audience is connected TV. We are trying to get our clients to think bigger about what a digital campaign is, right? And how do you take the power of digital and apply it to a lot of different mediums versus just a phone, a tablet, or a laptop, right? Like digital and the inherent benefits of digital. When you figure out how to apply it to out of home and podcast, radio, TV, connected TV, it's powerful and exciting. You can do some interesting things.
I agree with that. And I think as it relates back to the cookie, like that's actually a space where in so many ways, like our reliance on the cookie and for measurement especially, like has actually probably helped us as the industry at large back from investing in these spaces where cookies fundamentally have not worked. Places like connected TV, in-app, mobile, inventory, podcasts. So I think in some ways as we look towards the future, we'll be a little bit more freed to more actively pursue and invest in these new and emerging spaces. And as other spaces emerge, I think we'll have more of a mindset to be quicker to shift into testing into those environments.
Yeah, well, thank you guys so much. This was informative and fun to just sit here and catch up on, a hot topic like this. And if there's any other questions, please feel free to submit them. If not, I would like to thank Gogi and Alex for joining me today and talking about the countdown to Cookieless, which is already, the countdown is over. We are here and nothing happened crazy and advertising still looks great. So I'm going to like to turn it over to Jim Rooney. I think he's joined us here, President and CEO. Hey, Jim, how are you?
Good. Thank you, Lindsay. And thank you to you and to Alex and Gogi for a fantastic discussion on the future of connecting with your customer, advertising, what the future looks like with the loss of third-party cookie. Fast-paced environment and requiring pivots and new strategies. And we look forward to having additional conversations like this to keep everyone abreast of what's going on. My big takeaway, Gogi, was you can always feel success. I like that. I like that phrase. I want to give a special thank you to our sponsors today, Market, Adherent, Effect TV, and Hybrid Dairy. Thank you to the sponsors for making these events possible. Stick around. There is a networking event coming up after this, but I do want to highlight an upcoming chamber event on June 22nd. We have a women's network event on philanthropy post-pandemic, another world that's being disrupted. In this event, we'll hear from an expert panel on how philanthropy is evolving and how organizations themselves are changing. Perhaps we can marry these worlds a little bit, and this group can help people that are engaged in philanthropy to think about how they approach their customers. You can register for this program and more by visiting bostonchamber.com. And I know that a BIMA audience always likes to network and have a little fun. Can't do it like we used to with BIMA in the past, but please stick around for the networking session that will begin in just a few minutes. And stay in touch. Look forward to getting together and really having a BIMA reunion of sorts, live and in person in the fall, when we can all get back together and talk about these things in person and maybe celebrate each other. So thank you all. Thank you to everyone who was involved in the panels today, and stick around for the networking session.